How did you find out, or how did you think that you should move from investment banking to really launch a company?
I think I'd always wanted to do it, even since I was a kid. Had the idea, one of the people who every time I look at something, it looks like it could be improved. There's something wrong with it, so I go through like, wow, how could this restaurant be better? How could, and so I've always had that kind of idea. But I think the great thing about humans in general is we're always improving things. And so entrepreneurs and inventors, if they follow their curiosity and they follow their passions and they figure something out and then they figure out how to make it better and they're never satisfied. And you need to harness that. In my view, you need to harness that energy primarily on your customers instead of on your competitors. And so where I sometimes see companies and even young, small startup companies, entrepreneurs go awry, is they start to pay more attention to their competition than they do to their customers. And I think that in big, mature industries, that might be a winning approach in some cases, kind of close following. Let other people be the pioneers and go down the blind alleys. There's many things that a new inventive company tries won't work. And so those mistakes and errors and failures do cost real money. And so maybe in a mature industry where growth rates are slow and change is very slow. But as you see in the world more and more, there aren't very many mature industries. Change is happening everywhere. We see it in the automobile industry with self-driving cars, but you could go right down the line of every industry and you would see it.
But do you have any idea where your ambition really comes from? What was driving you?
I really don't know. I've been passionate about certain things forever, and I fell in love with computers in 4th grade. I got very lucky. My elementary school had a teletype that got connected to a mainframe computer that some business in downtown Houston donated a little bit of computer time to. This is, you can picture these teletypes. They had the punch tape and they had a 300 baud modem. You would dial up the phone and put it in the cradle. And so we had some time sharing on that mainframe computer, and none of the teachers knew how to use it. So me and 2 other kids stayed after school and sort of figured out how to do it and kind of taught ourselves programming from books. I think one thing that is, I got very lucky early in my childhood. Look, we all get gifts. We get certain things in our life that we're very lucky about. And one of the most powerful one is who your early role models are. They could be your
was your
parents.
grandfather.
It was, in a big sense. My mom and dad, but my grandfather too. So the gift I had is I had this incredible family. It was super important for me, and I spent an unusual amount of time with my grandparents, and especially with my grandfather on the ranch. So he had a ranch in South Texas, and I would spend my summers there from age 4 to 16. And when I was 4, they were taking me for the summer to kind of give my parents a break, sort of because they were so young. And it was useful. I was a handful, I'm sure. And anyway, he created the illusion for me when I was 4 years old that I was helping him on the ranch, which of course could not have been true, but I believed it. And then by the time I was 16, of course, I was actually helping on the ranch. I can fix prolapsed cattle. We did all of our own veterinary work. Some of the cattle even survived. We fixed windmills and laid, water pipelines and built fences and barns and fixed the bulldozer that you guys talked about. And so one of the things that's so interesting about that lifestyle and about my grandfather is he did everything himself. He didn't call a vet if one of the animals was sick. He figured out what to do himself. And
so what does it mean? No delegation?
Being resourceful, I think, is that you can't, if there's a problem, there's a solution. And of course, as you mature and get into the business world and anything you do on a team, you very quickly realize that it's not about just your own resourcefulness, it's about team resourcefulness and how does that work. And But that attitude of my grandfather's was very, but he was full of wisdom. John mentioned the story about the words my grandfather gave to me at one point of, it's harder to be kind than clever. That story, the slightly longer version of that story, because this was really powerful wisdom, is that I made my grandmother burst into tears. And the way I did it was we were driving on a long road trip, and she was a chain smoker. And I was probably, 10 years old, so this was around 1974. And it was in a period of time where there were heavy radio advertisements, sort of anti-smoking radio advertisements, trying to convince people to stop smoking. And one of the advertisements had this figure in it. It said something like, every puff of a cigarette takes so many minutes off of your life. I think it was 2 minutes, but I can't remember. Every puff of a cigarette. So I sat there in the back seat on this long car ride and calculated how many years she had taken off of her life. And in my 10-year-old mind, I had been extremely clever to do this. And so when I was finished with my arithmetic, I proudly announced to her how many years she had taken off of her life. And I got a reaction I did not expect, with her bursting into tears. And so my grandfather stopped the car and he took me out of the car. And I had no idea what was about to happen because he had never said a cross word to me. And I thought he might actually be angry with me, but he wasn't. He took me out we had some privacy from her. And he said these incredible words. He said, you're gonna figure out one day that it's harder to be kind than clever. They're so loving and supportive that when you have loving and supportive people in your life, like Mackenzie, my parents, my grandfather, my grandmother, you end up being able to take risk. Because I think it's one of those things, it doesn't, you kind of know somebody's got your back. And so it's just, I don't even think you're thinking about it logically, it's an emotional thing. So for
That's
me,
really interesting. You think that unconditional love, if you feel and experience unconditional love, I
think it helps you take risk in life. And by the way,
Yeah.
I think it's probably true of all kinds of risks in life, not just starting a business. I mean, life is full of different risks. And I think that when you think about the things that you will regret when you're 80, they are almost always the things that you did not do. They are acts of omission. Very rarely are you gonna regret something that you did and it failed and didn't work or whatever. But the acts of omission, the thing, it's not, and again, I'm not just talking about business things. It's like, I loved that person and I never told them. And then, 50 years later, you'd be like, why didn't I tell her? Why didn't I go after it? So that's the kind of life regret that is very hard to be happy about when you're telling yourself in a private moment that story of your life. My wife is a novelist. She's won the American Book Award. Toni Morrison, the Nobel Prize-winning author, who was Mackenzie's teacher at Princeton.
She then suggests that you focus on book business at the beginning, being an author?
No, I picked
That was your
books.
idea?
I picked books. It is true, she's a big reader, I'm a big reader, but that's not why I picked books. I picked books because there were more items in the book category than any other category, and so you could build universal selection. There were 3 million in 1994 when I was pulling this idea together. The 3 million different books active and in print at any given time, and the largest physical bookstores only had about 150,000 different titles. And so I could see how you could make a bookstore online with universal selection. Every book ever printed, even the out-of-print ones, was the original vision for the company. And so that's why books.
And when did you know that Amazon is going to be something way bigger than just a bookstore?
Well, I knew that the books, strangely, because I was very prepared for this to take a really long time. I knew that the books business was going to be successful in the first 30 days. I was shocked at how many books we sold. We were ill prepared. We had only 10 people in the company at that time, and most of them were software engineers. And so everybody, including me and the software engineers, were all like packing boxes. We didn't even have packing tables. And we were on our hands and knees on a concrete floor packing the boxes. And at about 1 or 2 in the morning, I said to one of my software engineering colleagues, I said, Paul, this is killing my knees. we need to get knee pads. And Paul looked at me and he's like, Jeff, we need to get packing tables. and I was like, oh my God, that is such a good idea. The next day I bought packing tables and it doubled our productivity and probably saved our backs and our knees too.
But nevertheless, I mean, Amazon had serious crises. In 2002, you went almost bankrupt. So what went wrong and what did you learn from that?
We had so many, there have been so many, we haven't had any existential crises, knock on wood. I don't want to jinx anything. But we've had a lot of kind of dramatic events. I remember early on, we only had 125 employees when Barnes & Noble, the big United States bookseller, opened their online website to compete against us, barnesandnoble.com. We'd had about a 2-year window. We opened in 95, they opened in 97. And at that time, all of the headlines, and the funniest were about how we were about to be destroyed by this much larger company. We had 125 employees and $60 million a year in annual sales, 60 million with an M. And that, and Barnes & Noble at the time had 30,000 employees and about $3 billion in sales. So they were giant, we were tiny, and we had limited resources. And the headlines were very negative about Amazon. And the one that's most memorable was just Amazon.toast. And so I called an all-hands meeting, which was not hard to do with just 125 people. And we got in a room, and because it was so scary for all of us, this idea that now we finally had a big competitor, that literally everybody's parents were calling and saying, are you okay? It's usually the moms calling and asking their children, are you going to be okay? So, and I said, look, it's okay to be afraid, but don't be afraid of our competitors because they're never going to send us any money. Be afraid of our customers. And if we just stay focused on them and instead of obsessing over this big competitor that we just got, we'll be fine. And I really do believe that. I think that if you stay focused, then the more drama there is and everything else, no matter what the drama is, whatever the external distraction is, what your response to it should be to double down on the customer, satisfying them, not just satisfying them, delighting them. Yeah. First of all, when any criticism, my approach to criticism and what I teach and preach inside Amazon is, when you're criticized, first look in a mirror and decide, are your critics right? If they're right, change. Don't resist. Right? No, but not in this case. But we've had critics be right before, and we've changed. We have made mistakes, and I can go through a long list. Probably one of the early most painful ones. It's so stupid. It's hard to believe how we ever did it, but early on with the Kindle, maybe the first year of the Kindle or the second year of the Kindle, we had accidentally, illegally sold, or given away, I guess, copies of the famous novel 1984 because it had a complicated copyright history. It was in copyright in the US and not in the UK or something strange like this. So it was in the public domain, but only in certain geographies. And we had screwed that up. And somehow, and this is a kind of mistake that only a corporation can make. An individual can't make this mistake because somehow it's like it happens at the intersections of the different teams. So you've got the legal department saying, "Oh crap, we've made this mistake," and you've got the books team. Anyway, the answer that the company came up with was to, without any notice or warning, just electronically go into everybody's Kindle who had downloaded that book and just disappear it. So it'd be as if we walked into your bedroom in the middle of the night, found your bookshelf, and just took that book away. And so it was. So we were rightly criticized for that. It was, and we responded to that. On the issue of working conditions, I'm very proud of our working conditions, and I'm very proud of the wages that we pay. You know, in Germany we employ 16,000 people. We pay at the high end of the range for any comparable work. You know, and this is in my longer version of how to deal with critics, because there are two kinds of critics. There are well-meaning critics who, you know, they're worried it's not going to work, but they do want it to work. And so it could be, I can give you an example, customer reviews would be one of those. When we first did customer reviews 20 years ago, some book publishers were not happy about it because some of them are negative. And so it was a very controversial practice at that time, but we thought it was right, and so we stuck to our guns and had a deep heel on that and didn't change. But there's a second kind of critic, which is the self-interested critic, and they come in all shapes and sizes. You know, so they can be any kind of institution, competitors, of course. And so when you are doing something in a new way, and if customers embrace the new way, what's going to happen is incumbents who are practicing the older way are not going to like you. And they're going to be self-interested critics. And so you do need, as you're looking yourself in the mirror, to try and tease those two things apart. You know, in our view, you know, we have workers' councils, of course, and we have very good communications with our employees. So we don't believe that we need a union to be an intermediary between us and our employees. But of course, at the end of the day, it's always the employee's choice, and that's how it should be. So but for sure, we would be very naive to believe that we're not going to be criticized. I mean, that's just part of the terrain. You have to accept that. One thing I tell people is, if you're going to do anything new or innovative, you have to be willing to be misunderstood. If you can't afford to be misunderstood, then for goodness sake, don't do anything new or innovative.